Hello, I'm that Rob Human, and this is part 11 of my Tabletop Playground mod development series. In this episode, we're going to dive into scripting, at least the very basics of scripting. Before we actually dive into it, though, I want to be clear on what this tutorial or this episode isn't, which is this isn't going to be a here's how you code in JavaScript all-inclusively, or in my case, TypeScript. There are plenty of tutorials out there on the basics of JavaScript and TypeScript. I'll actually try my best to find a couple of them and link them down in the comments or the description below. But I just want to set some expectations. This kind of assumes that you have a vague understanding of programming and scripting as a whole. I'll try my best to not make any assumptions about TypeScript or JavaScript specific syntax as I go, but this is not a getting started with JavaScript globally. Just to be clear about what you're going to be encountering here. So if you don't know anything about JavaScript or TypeScript, I would actually give this a pause and do a little bit more learning on JavaScript and TypeScript specifically. Again, hopefully descriptions in the links in the description and whatnot, and then come back to this a little bit here. So when we built up our project here using the create TTPG package script, we used the TSX template, which allows you to do some cool things with widgets and JSX. I'm not going to get into that in this episode, probably in a future episode, maybe even the next episode, or 2 episodes hence, we'll get into that. But the thing I want to highlight here and why that's relevant is you've got a source script that is helloworld.tsx. TSX is a special file extension specifically for doing TypeScript in JSX mode, I guess you could say. But essentially, you can delete this, and in fact, I'm going to do exactly that. I'm actually going to, so we can actually right-click, and we'll do hello world.ts. TS being the generic TypeScript script, not the extended TypeScript script format. The TypeScript compiler makes a distinction there. So we'll dive into why that's important in the future, but just wanted to start this off right off the bat here. So to kind of reproduce what we had already, I'm going to add a console.log hello world, at which point I can actually come down here and we'll do a yarn dev, and it'll transpile all the scripts, and there's our script, hello world.js. You'll notice that it is a JS file now, not a TS file, and that's just because how TypeScript does something called transpiling, where it takes its TypeScript syntax and transforms it into JavaScript syntax. In this case, it looks similar because we're not actually using any TypeScript-specific syntax here, but that is a necessary step to get the script in game. You can also do yarn watch, such that it will watch everything in this src or source directory, and as things change, and I save that file, it will actually update the outputted version of that in real time. So while you're in the middle of developing, it might be useful to use yarn watch instead of yarn dev. Moving on, I'm going to come into our package here, and we're going to use this metal cuboid here as our kind of dummy test object. So I'll edit this, and you'll see it already has the hello world.js selected as the script. This is how you assign a script to an object. Let's save, we'll go back, and I'm just going to set up an empty state here so we have this to play with. And I'll pull in a template. And you might be able to see here, there's our console message. This is that console.log. It's worth noting that console.log only shows up for the host, so your other players won't see this console log, and that I think is actually a good thing. It stop that. Okay. It basically just gives a little bit more debugging potential, which is what console.log is really used for 9 times out of 10. It's debugging and, well, logging. So just worth noting that if you want to send a message to all the players, there's a way to do that. We'll get into that. Before going into this even further, I do want to also mention that the Tabletop Playground API documentation is really good. It is incredibly inclusive. It has everything that you might need. It might take a little bit to parse out what they mean, but everything is laid out here really nicely. There will be a link in the description. And I still use this. Like, this is... I type in API and it brings me here. So this is a heavily utilized reference for me. It's just nicely laid out too. It's nice and intuitive once you get used to it. So just throwing that out there. If you're stuck and you need to see what a thing can do, you know, what events can I listen to on an object, well, here they are. Anything that starts with an on is an event. We'll get into events and event busing in a minute, but yeah, so definitely recommend checking out the API docs if you're ever confused or lost or want to know what the capabilities of an object are. Alright, that being said, let's dive into actually making a somewhat useful script for this debug cuboid. My plan here is to I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to do, and then we'll actually implement it. The plan here is to add a right-click context menu on this cuboid. So if I go into the game, I'm going to add a right-click option here that will allow someone to take ownership of that cuboid. So like it'll say, take ownership. And it will have some logic in it that will, once someone has taken ownership of it, there'll be a different right-click menu that says revoke ownership, that only that player can click on. Well, other players can click on it, but it'll have no effect. So we'll walk through a little bit of that when we get there. But first, let's talk about setting up a context menu item for this object. So we have our script, and let's actually make a new one so we're not using hello world. We use cuboid.ts. Okay, so we're in this cuboid, and I know right off the bat I'm going to need to import ref object from the API because we'll be using that in a second. And so this is a bit of a pattern that I've come to find to be really useful. And it's called an IFI, or is it immediately invoked functional expression? IFI. It basically is kind of my, if you're familiar with programming, this is kind of my main, quote-unquote, function entry. It's kind of this is what function will run when it gets added to an object and gets brought into game. I find this really useful for making sure I have the right reference, because the ref object is can be a little wonky if you're importing scripts in different places and whatnot, so that can be significant. So I like to wrap it immediately in a closure that kind of makes sure that my reference is good. So this is kind of like main function. So this is like, if you're familiar with Java, this is kind of the equivalent of my static void main. This is what this is. So to do an IFI, I'm going to say the object, which is a game object, this, and we'll just do ref object. So when this function is run, and it is run immediately because of this set of parentheses, this object is equal to this ref object. But if I ever import this in a different context in a different script, it'll keep this object reference. So like, I'm using reference too much as a term. Suffice to say that I have found this to be a little bit more reliable in terms of references. Take it for what you will. You could also just do the same basic idea, where it's object, game, object, and you can run your code here, and then just do main ref object. That's actually functionally the same thing. I just like the eefy expression. So I also like saying eefy. Anyways, so we're going to add a right-click context menu item, and we're going to have it change the behavior of this object when we do that. And so we need to talk about events. Events, or an event bus, is, and I'm going to come back to the documentation and to game object. An event is a thing that happens in game when something happens. It gets triggered. A good example here is like on flip upright, okay, or on released, or on pickup. I think it's actually on grabbed. Yeah, on grab. So like this event will fire when someone picks up the object. In fact, we can do exactly this. This is a good example here. We'll do object.onGrab. So this is the event bus. It's the bus that all the events hang out on, and let you know when such an event gets triggered. So we'll do add, and this takes a function. And I know that the function takes a game object. And yeah, this is the same game object as the obj variable here, or argument. That's fine. And player, which is a player. I'm going to Control-Shift-I to import all that. In fact, we'll change the parameter of that p. We probably won't use the player, but yeah, what have you. And let's make it so we'll do console log. I said hello world. Or you know, let's actually do this. I was grabbed by p.get player get name. There we go. So the idea here is that this function will run when onGrab happens. So this should be all good here. So we're going to right click on this to go to the template, and we'll change this to cuboid. And we'll hit save and go back. And watch this console here. When I pick it up, it didn't work. Why not? Did it actually save the cuboid? Well, that doesn't feel very good. On grab.add, I was grabbed by p.name. That should work. I have a feeling I know what's going on. This happens occasionally where the caching is an issue, so I'll just recreate the state and bring it in, and should be fine now. There we go. Yeah, so sometimes when you add a new script, and even yarn watch, you do the thing, but I think there's a caching that Tabletop Playground does on new scripts. I'm not entirely sure. But it shouldn't be a problem now that, you know, it's now aware of that script. See, as you can say, I was grabbed by that Rob human. Okay, let's get rid of this, and let's actually make sure... You know what? Let's do this. Object.onReleased.add. Console.log p.name. Let's actually make sure this works. There we go. I was dropped. See, it does actually start updating when it's aware of the script, but the first time you add a script, you might need to reload the state. Anyways. Alright, so we've got our main EFI, and so we want to add a right-click menu option, and that's kind of a two-step process here. And we'll do object.add custom action. The name of this will be, this is what actually shows up in the name, and we'll say take ownership. We can give it a hint, say make this object mine, and the last parameter is an identifier. It will use the name as the identifier if you leave it blank, but I like to be explicit, even if it seems a little redundant. The identifier will come about in just a minute. Hear me out. So if we run that, right off the bat, you can say there's take ownership. Now, a trick with this is it's been observed that the custom actions kind of blend in with the normal actions. So what I've taken to doing, if I can find the page here, is actually putting little symbols in the name. Oop. Yeah, there we go. So they stand out a little bit more. That's a common practice I've seen. I'm gonna right click and reload scripting, and you know, it just makes them stand out a little bit more. That might be relevant to you. It might be a thing that you want to do. You could make them in whatever significant way you want. I like the double arrow or the Castilian quotes. I think they're fancy. So right now, this take ownership thing doesn't actually do anything. It's just a button that doesn't do anything. So to do that, we're actually going to use another event bus on custom action, and .add, and this of course takes an action, and this will trigger when any custom action runs, and that's where that identifier comes in. So we know that the first object is the first argument is the object, the second argument is the player, and the third argument is the ID. And the way we do this is if ID is equal to take ownership, then we run this code. So you don't actually need a different event function, an event callback for each individual action. You can if you want, but you don't necessarily need to. So that's a thing. In fact, what I often see is a switch ID case take ownership, and it will return do take ownership. Say that. I mean, obviously I haven't defined that function, so it's going to yell at me, but like that is another option. So you can be like case revoke ownership. Do revoke ownership. In fact, let's actually do that. We'll do it this way. Okay. Okay, so let's define those two functions. Do take ownership equals P is going to be a player, and we'll do const do revoke ownership equals P player. Okay. And when we take ownership, what do we want to happen? Well, let's first we want to change the color, probably, right? So let's do object.set owning player slot. I don't know if this will actually change the color, but this is a good thing to do as far as ownership goes. p.get, is it get slot? There we go. So it's setting the owning player slot to be the current player slot. Cool. Object.set owning player slot. I think we do -1 to say this is not owned anymore. So we can do that. So the idea here is when we right click and say take ownership, it should run this. And we'll do play.get name is taking ownership. That should show up, right? Cool. Reload scripting and right click and take ownership. Yep, okay, so I've taken ownership. It doesn't change the color, and that's okay. So we can do that. Object.set primary color, p.get primary color. So we're setting the primary color of the object to the primary color of the player. Cool. And when we revoke it, I know we're gonna set primary color. We'll set a constant that is white. Const white equals new color. No, color 1111. Okay, so that's just a handy constant to have. I don't know if color comes with any constants. Probably not. Does it? Yeah, no. Okay. So we'll do that. We'll reload scripting. We'll say take ownership and green. Is that actually my color? No, blue. Interesting. Why did that go to green? I don't know. It's a little unusual. Take ownership. I don't know why that swapped to green. That should have swapped to blue because I'm the blue player. Let's set that as a parameter and see what happens. rpcolor.g pcolor.b. And we'll set a 1 for the alpha. Oh, let's put that in array. RGB. Cool. Interesting. Oh. Get player color, not primary color. There we go. There we go. That's more what I expected. I'm not sure what a player's primary color is as distinct from its player, like it I'm not sure. But yeah, we want the player color, not the primary color. Cool. See, I've been doing this for a while, and even I get tripped up. This is why documentation is important. Anyways, so we got our do take ownership. And we don't have our revoke ownership. So let's do that. Now we could just add a custom action that says revoke ownership, and we'll change this to revoke. And of course, this identifier is the same as this identifier. Cool. Make this object no ones. And now we have, if we reload the scripting, we have revoke ownership. We can take ownership. But these two are kind of redundant to each other, so we can, there's a way we can have it so that it would kind of make it so that one is exclusive to the other. So we'll do that now. And the way we do that is during take ownership, we'll say object.add custom action, and this is where we'll do this. In fact, let's actually just move that function down, that thing into there. And here we'll do this. We can also do object.remove custom action, revoke. We take ownership. And when we revoke ownership, we want to remove the revoke ownership. Okay? That should be fairly intuitive, but basically when the object gets spawned or when the game starts, we have this one custom action, take ownership, which when you click it runs this event with this ID. In this case, take ownership will run this do take ownership function. Come back to here, take ownership will run this, will run. We can get rid of this console log. It'll set the owning player slot. It'll set the primary color. It will add the custom action for revoking ownership, and it will remove the action for take ownership. So there'll only be one custom action there at a time. Likewise, if you click on the context menu for revoking ownership, we'll run this custom event. We'll say, you know, you're revoking the ownership, run this function. It will clear out that stuff. It will add the custom action to take ownership again so that someone else can take it if need be, and, you know, remove custom action to remove its own, or to remove itself as a right-click context menu. So we can reload scripting, take ownership, revoke ownership. Now, there's a bit of a problem here, and the savvy among you might have already noticed, which is if I take ownership, anyone can right-click on it and say revoke ownership, which you can steal items that way, which may or may not be what you want. So to get around that, what I'm going to do here is during revoke ownership, I'm going to check to see if the object's current owner is the player that invoked the action. So to do that, we'll do object.get owning player. I don't actually need owning player slot, do I? I can actually change that. Oh, no. Okay, so you can only set the player slot, but you can get owning player. If that's P, then we can do this. If this object's owning player is equal to the player that clicked the button, then we do this. Else, we'll do a console.log. We do not have permission to revoke. I mean, we're not going to see this because I'm only one player and I am the owner of the object, but, you know, what have you. So we can take ownership, and we can revoke ownership. Actually, let's see if we can do this through session stuff. Player options, I'm going to say I'm green now, and if I try to revoke, see, it does kind of remember. So that might actually be a good reason to use slot. Okay. I'm not sure if that's actually going to make a difference, but it might. Let's find out. Take ownership. Cool. Player options, I changed my slot to red. Can I revoke? I don't have permissions to revoke ownership. So if I go back to green. So yeah. So the significant difference there is kind of, do you want the owner to, the ownership to follow the player, you know, or do you want it to be based on color? That's kind of the difference there. So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. Now, obviously, like I said, the console log only shows up if you're the host. So another player won't actually see this console log message if they're not hosting the game. So I'm going to actually look up on the API here, because I can't remember the syntax to do this. I think it's player? Player.showMessage. Yes, excellent. So we can do this. p.showMessage. And we can just take that and do this. Cool. Reload scripting. We're going to take ownership. And I will change my slot to red. So I'm now the red player. And I'm going to try and revoke ownership. And you get this message. And only this player would see this message. So it's not going to spam everyone to be like, you know, it'll only be like, hey, this one player got that message when trying to revoke ownership. That may not be what you want. You might want to actually just have it fail silently. You might want to do world.send. Can you do this? World? I think there's a way to do it in a chat message. Let's find out. I don't think there is in the player class, so I think it's in the world. So game world. Chat. There's broadcast chat message. Yep. That sends a chat message to all players. I don't think there's a way to actually send a chat message to every player. Or to a specific player. I'm not sure. Maybe there is. If there is, I can't think of how to do it. Let's see if we can chat. Yeah, no, there's no... What have you. Oh, you know what? Maybe it would actually be under whisper. I bet you guys are just screaming at the screen going, here's how you do it, you tosser. Nope. Okay. Maybe under game world for... Nope. Okay. Anyways, I'm sure there is a way to do it. There might not be. I'm not sure. I don't really use it. I just use the message, or, you know, the show message for everything. I think there's also a way to show message for everyone as like an error. So it's bright red. I don't know. I don't do that often. I handle my errors slightly differently normally. Anyways, so that's kind of how you would use some event buses and some... Oh, I'm sorry. I've already missed something here. The nature of this is such that it will always start with the take ownership button visible, which might be what you want, might not be. I don't know if the set owning player slot gets persisted between game states. So like if I were to come in here and I can't revoke ownership because of my own permission system. So if I revoke ownership, I'm going to come to the object alive player options, red. And I'm going to do this. As a debug message, I'm going to console.log object.get owning player slot.get. Oh, that's a number, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Just as a console message, we're just going to do this. And this is currently -1. It means it's not owned. Cool. So I'm going to take ownership of it, and it is currently red's, and if we reload scripting, 2. Okay, so red is 2, that makes sense. So I'm going to actually save this state. And I'm actually going to come back out of here, or I wonder if we can just load the state. You know, let's not assume that that'll work right. I'm going to load game, test state, continue, station, because it's the prettiest. Okay, so it does persist, it seems. So it remembers that this is slot 2. But I bet you're going to notice what's going on here. Why can I take ownership of it still? In fact, if I run this, oh, not sure what happened there. Yeah? But it's already owned when the game started, right? So that right-click option, if I were to reload this state, should actually be revoke ownership. Well, that's kind of odd. So we're going to do this. Up at the top of this, we'll do this. If object.getPlayerSlot is not equal to -1, else, the way that this does this, there we go. Okay, so what this means is if getOwningPlayerSlot is not equal to -1, which basically means is this object owned, then we want to have the custom action of revoke ownership be the initial starting state, the initial context menu option. If it's not owned, then we want it to start with take ownership, right? So that's kind of the initial setter of this. And you could probably get more efficient with, doing this way, where you kind of abstract that out and refactor this so that it's its own function or whatnot, but for the sake of this, it's fine. So we're going to reload the scripting, revoke ownership, take ownership. Cool. Now if we load this state, right-click, revoke ownership. In fact, let's actually make sure this works. We'll go into preview package, load the game, test state, station, right-click, and there's revoke ownership. Excellent. That's exactly what we wanted. So that's how you kind of initialize the state of the thing based on stuff that gets persisted between save states. There's a bit more nuance and to some of that, and no doubt this can be optimized some, but this is like kind of bare bones stuff. So this function gets run when the object gets instantiated, or when the object or when the game gets loaded. So it runs through and says, yeah, do I have an owning player slot? Yes. Put revoke as the primary option. If not, put the take ownership as a primary option. It then defines these functions that'll get run later, and then it says, all right, now listen to the on custom action event. When that event triggers, run this function. This callback is what that's called, a handler callback. If the ID argument is equal to take ownership, run this function. If it's equal to that, run this function. And these are the functions that it does. That's kind of the primary loop of that ownership thing. And that's how a lot of events work. You subscribe to an event and do this. So actually, let's get even slightly fancier. Let's do object.onGrab.add. We'll do O and P, because we know O is the object and P is the player. And yeah, I totally could actually use, I could pass in O and P for this. And that would make this closure redundant, but like, I don't want to get distracted with that. Anyways, so on grab, we'll say, let's see, if object.getOwningPlayerSlot is equal to -1, so if it's unowned, well, do take ownership using this player. So the idea here is when you grab it, if it's unowned, you'll own it. That's kind of cool. Well, we'll revoke that and do that. So if I pick this up, I now own the object. And I can revoke it. And if I change player slots here, I pick it up, I now own this object. Maybe that's something you want. I don't know. You could also do, let's see, object.onReleased.add OP where P is the player, if object.get owning player slot is equal to P.get slot, do revoke ownership. I mean, this is going to be a little silly, but you know, you get the idea. So basically this asks if the object's owner is the same player that dropped it, then revoke ownership. So we can do that. We can, let's say, take ownership, pick it up, and drop it. And now it's fair game again. Or I can pick it up, and I own it, and I can drop it. And then it's fair game again. So these event buses are kind of the driving force behind a lot of different actions that you can do in game. You listen to the event bus, you listen for specific events, and then you react to them. That's pretty much the basics of the event bus and some functions and whatnot. Maybe in the next one we'll talk about UI, or maybe we'll talk about external dependencies a little bit. We'll explore scripting a little bit more, but I just wanted to kind of get your feet wet in terms of what scripting kind of feels like. If you have a specific scripting situation that you want to see explored on this sub-series, or whilst we're in the middle of scripting, drop a comment in the description, and either I'll help you out right in the comments, or, as I always say, I'm on the Discord. But if it's kind of generic and widely applicable, kind of a question that might be asked by a lot of people getting into this, I might do an episode on specifically that. So, you know, don't hold back. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck!